This video was 9 months in the making. Throughout the extent of this project, you're going to see me try things that I didn't think were going to work and did, try things that I did think were going to work and didn't, and overall learn how to better record and show these processes. Stick around to see how I made this live edge English walnut desk, the Double K way. For a while now, I've been considering making woodworking YouTube videos, but I didn't pull the trigger because I wasn't sure if I would have the audience. I wasn't sure if people wanted to see the way I create things, and I really didn't know if I could handle the recording and editing of the footage. A customer reached out to me inquiring about an executive desk made out of English walnut, and I thought this may be the opportunity to start this whole YouTube thing. I spoke with the customer about implementing some of these ideas I had for the project, and basically told him there'd be no extra cost for any of them. I really just wanted to work on some stuff that I'd never done before and make this desk a showcase piece, including things that I haven't seen done before. The slab we ended up choosing for the desk is this really nice piece of marble cake English walnut. One of the caveats to this piece of wood, though, is that, as is often the case with English walnut, it's quite unstable and has a ton of checking and cracking throughout. This requires an extensive preparation process where I need to clean out all the cracks, voids, debark, so that no debris gets in the epoxy when I fill all the cracks to stabilize the piece. Before pouring the epoxy, all the cracks need to be sealed in some way. Due to most being not very wide, I opted to use sheathing tape. There are a variety of companies that make this product, but I've had the best results with this Grip Right tape. There was one larger crack that I wasn't sure if sheathing tape would be sufficient, so I made it a small mold out of melamine and screwed that to the end where I left a couple extra inches. Here I'm using Super Clear's 1:1 tabletop epoxy to seal the entire slab so that when I pour black epoxy on it, there's no staining. Between sealing the slab and pouring the black epoxy, I wait about 3 to 4 hours or until the epoxy is slightly tacky. This ensures that you don't stain deep into the wood fibers on the surface, but you're still able to bond the wood fibers in the cracks and stabilize the slab completely. With this filling process, I've found that it's better to overfill than underfill so that there's less potential for unfilled cracks. Another one of the difficult parts of this slab, besides filling all the cracks, was that on the bottom side of the slab where the bases and C-channel need to be attached, there was this large undulating live edge. Due to the width of this and where that extended to, I wasn't able to attach a base without completely filling this portion with epoxy. I didn't feel comfortable trying to make a mold out of melamine and forming it to this live edge, so the best idea I had was to take some cardboard, put sheathing tape on it, put a ton of silicone on it, and staple it to this edge. After a couple hours, once the silicone was set up, I could pour some 1:1 tabletop epoxy, let that cure for 24 hours, come back, scuff it up, and finish it off with some deep pour epoxy. There are two primary ways to get epoxy to bond to epoxy. Those are either chemical or mechanical bonds. The first is by pouring epoxy over a partially or mostly cured epoxy so that they actually bond chemically at a molecular level. The latter, which you can see here, is by abrading the surface, cleaning any debris so that it doesn't get in the second batch of epoxy, and then pour epoxy over the existing surface. I'm not going to lie to you, of all the things I did on this project, this may have been the sketchiest, even though there were many new things for me in this project. This seemed like it was bound to fail, and I went to sleep that night thinking that I was going to wake up seeing epoxy all over the floor. I did wake up seeing epoxy on the floor, but that was only due to overfilling, not due to a leak in the mold. The cardboard with sheathing tape and silicone worked much better than I expected. A lot of the live edge slab desks you'll see on YouTube or Instagram or whatever platform it may be usually lack a primary component to a desk, and that is a drawer. I'm not saying that facetiously as in those desks are inferior or insufficient, but when I think of a desk, I think of the ability to store stuff. I've never made a drawer before. And if you surf the web, there really aren't a whole lot of models to follow out there. There aren't a ton of slab desks with these drawers. So I'm kind of winging it here. One thing I thought up that I wanted to do is that I wanted to deck this thing out. So I figured that my drawer box, I would do a continuous grain wrap book match. I was really lucky in that there were quite a few offcuts from that slab. So I took all of those offcuts, resawed them. As you can see, I struggled to resaw them. I have no bandsaw, so I actually had to make those cuts initially on the table saw, which I'm not showing because of the danger of it, and then finish those off with hand sawing. To get the best book match possible, your two pieces need to be flat and coplanar. To remove the mill marks from resawing, I passed the two pieces through the drum sander. Although the faces are now flat and coplanar, the edges need to be re-ripped on the table saw to create two 90-degree edges for the most seamless glue up. As you can see here, that seam is now much cleaner. For this book match panel glue up, I opted to use Titebond 2. Titebond 2's open time would be sufficient for this 2-board glue up, and also the color matches the sapwood of the English walnut quite well. Using both pipe clamps and trigger clamps, I applied liberal pressure to get just enough squeeze out to ensure a good glue up. After gluing, I flattened the panel again on the drum sander before squaring one end so that I could cut the panel into the continuous pieces of the drawer case. I initially contemplated whether or not I wanted to cut the 45-degree miters as an entire panel or as individual pieces. Due to wanting to preserve the grain continuity, I figured that cutting each segment of the box first at 90 degrees would give me the best ability to make a clean cut for the 45-degree miter. Now that all the pieces to the drawer case are cut to size, I can cut a groove into the back of all of them that will hold the back for the drawer case. I broke down some very figured curly English walnut from my personal stash and off camera resawed that on the table saw and surfaced it. I then dry fit all the pieces to make sure the box is the proper size and fits together well. I'll dive deeper into this later in the video, but here I'm setting out the way I'll attach this drawer case to the bottom of the slab. I'm drilling oversized holes for furniture bolts to go into threaded inserts. I'm drilling them oversized to allow for wood movement. I then laid out marks for dominoes, as that's how I will join my pieces. The domino creates a loose mortise and tenon joint, which will increase the strength of the case versus just an end grain to end grain miter joint glue up. When I first made the domino cuts, I used the tightest setting. This proved to be rather difficult to get the box together, so I went up to the next setting on the domino, recut all of them, and the box fit together much better. I found that even with great layout lines, using the tightest domino setting, there's a little bit more restriction in getting that joint together. Therefore, I tend to use the wider setting on at least one of the joint sides. Earlier I mentioned using techniques that I thought would end up working out during this project, but didn't really prevail, and the use of this blue tape during the glue up is exactly that. I put it there so that there would be no squeeze out, because once this box is glued up, I can't really sand the inside of the case, but I had forgot to remove the tape in the curing of the glue, and thus I had a pretty rigorous process post glue up of trying to get that tape off because the glue cured it to the inside of the case. At first I tried to just pull it off with my fingers and it was going okay, but right along the glue joint it stuck pretty badly. So I went and got a heat gun, heated up the glue joint a little bit, and then pulled it off with a combination of my fingers and a chisel, and that worked out very well. At this point, the inside of the case is all clean and ready for the drawer slides. I shimmed the slides up with a 1/4-inch offcut, pre-drilled the holes on each side for the screws, and set the screws. I gave the drawer slides a pull to test the soft close, and everything looked alright. Now that the box is almost good to go, the epoxy on the slab has cured, and all of a sudden there's snow on the ground in New York. I'm taking the slab out to flatten it. I had a whole bunch of overpour on the top and bottom of the slab, so I thought that I could initially get some of it cleaned up for a flatter surface to start with a belt sander. Didn't go so well, so I pulled out the router sled, and the big Amana slab flattening bit and took it to town. This bit, as well as many of the other products used in this project, will be linked down below in the description. For full transparency's sake, these links will be affiliate links, so I will be getting a little bit of a financial cut from them. This part of the project is easily the most messy and probably one of the least fun, but one of the more important parts. These homemade router sleds are a great alternative to those that don't have access to large CNCs like myself. I do, however, have access through a local Mennonite cabinet shop to a large 41-inch wide belt sander. Off camera, after flattening it with the router sled, I touch up some of the imperfections and unfilled voids and then take it to this shop to get a nice clean surface sanded up to 120 grit. At this point, I'm not sure if it's 2 weeks later or 2 months later, but it's sunny in New York and I'm taking the slab out to address that void on the underside that was filled with epoxy. The outer edge of it is an abrupt flat surface and I want to create that into more of a faux live edge. I pull out the Kutzall carving discs, both the coarse and fine, and try to follow the contours of the outer part of that live edge to make it as realistic looking as possible. If you've ever been fortunate enough to be sucked in by the woodworking black hole on YouTube or Instagram, you've probably seen these metal plates that I have here. I say plates as I can't think of a more representative word, but this product is called C-channel based on the sort of C shape that you see with the plate and legs. This particular C-channel is made by a company called Bidwell Wood and Iron out of Chico, California. It's a high quality powder coated iron C-channel, and this is what I use on all of my slab furniture. There are still many people that don't use C-channel in these sort of builds, but I see it as an insurance policy and I'd rather be safe than sorry. What the C-channel does is acts as a stiffener for the slab. The legs and plate are recessed into the slab and then attached with threaded inserts and connector bolts, which should help mitigate any sort of potential wood movement like twist or cup. With these larger projects where the widths of slab may range from 20 to 40 inches, there is a significant chance of cupping, and these channel help minimize that potential movement. They don't eliminate, but they do mitigate. A slab with C-channel is going to stay flatter longer than a slab without. I have yet to make any sort of acrylic or melamine templates to make installation of these easier, so currently I'm using MDF as a straight edge and running a router along that to create the recess. I use the same technique to recess the base plate for the desk legs or bases. These particular bases on this desk are made by Flowy Line Design. Flowy Line has a very modern artistic approach to table bases. In my experience, they come with very clean welds, a really nice powder coat, and they also have leveling feet installed on the bottom. The bases and the C-channel are attached to the slab with countersunk threaded inserts and connector bolts. These hardware are chosen as in the event that the customer wants to change the bases or they move, these easily provide modularity. Additionally, with the slotted holes on the C-channel and the bases, this hardware choice allows seasonal wood movement and minimizes long-term potential for warping. They're also just a much cleaner look than traditional screws. Now that I have the C-channel and bases positioned and attached, I can position the drawer case on the underside of the slab. If you remember from earlier, I drilled oversized holes into the top of the drawer case. I'm now using the tip of the Forstner bit to locate the position of those holes to the underside of the slab. As was done with the C-channel and bases, the drawer case is being attached to the underside with countersunk threaded inserts and furniture bolts. Again, this is to accommodate wood movement, but also in the event that the customer wants to remove the drawer attachment from the underside, they're able to. After attaching the drawer case to the underside, I pull out the trim router and 1/8 inch roundover bit to soften the edges of both ends. This gives a much cleaner and uniform look than breaking the edges by hand. After running the slab through the wide belt sander, a lot of small voids and cracks were re-exposed. Here I'm using that super clear 1:1 tabletop epoxy and some black pigment to fill those back in. 24 hours later after curing, I need to get all of that excess off. I use the sander to heat the surface and the scraper to pull off the excess. After this, there are still micro imperfections in those cracks. I use a combination of black medium thick CA glue, this particular one by Starbond, and a thin clear glue to stabilize smaller cracks. Using that bigger, more aggressive scraper I was using on the epoxy tends to shear out this CA glue, so I use the card scraper and it's a little bit more methodical and gives cleaner results. I now have a slab and a drawer case that are almost ready for finish. But what I don't have is an actual drawer to go inside that case. Here I'm mapping out the components of a drawer on this super figured piece of curly maple. With all of the different design elements I chose to incorporate, this drawer here ended up being my favorite piece of the project. Because of that, I'm going to show more of the steps associated with the creation of this. Additionally, I'm going to go into more detail on some of my design selection. I bought this curly maple rough with no surfaces flattened, and it had some pretty gnarly twists. I don't have a joiner, so I opted to use a drum sander sled here to surface one side by shimming out the wobble and then turning the piece over and running it through on the flat side. Throughout the process of creating this drawer box, I try to keep the pieces oversized for as long as possible. Off camera, with a combination of the table saw and a hand saw, I resawed the piece that I'll be using for the bottom drawer panel to 3/8 inch thickness. I drum sanded out the mill marks, which left me around a little over a 1/4 inch. Both pieces are now flat and coplanar, so I re-ripped edges to give myself a seamless glue up. Here you get a sense of just how figured this maple is, and it almost looks as if this is going to be a guitar top. With a glue up with pieces this thin, I was a little bit worried about potential cupping of the panel, so I used blue tape to close up the joint, and then I used cawls on a piece of melamine to keep the panel overall as flat as possible. Again, here I used Titebond 2, as once it cures it's a little bit more yellow and will color match this figured maple quite well. The next day, after the glue is cured, I pulled the panel out of the clamping fixture and give it a light sand to remove any excess glue. I then square up the ends and trim the sides while being careful to maintain the symmetrical book match. At this point, I'm only leaving the panel slightly oversized so that I can nip away at the walls and the panel to get a good fit. The drawer box walls are still oversized, so I trim those to final length. Off camera, I make micro adjustments to both the walls and the panel to ensure I get the best overall fit when trying to put this box together. I'm doing a simple butt joint for this drawer. I'm using a domino here, so I'm laying out those lines, but the same thing could be done with dowels, or if I really wanted to, I could have used pocket hole screws on the front and back face as they'd never be seen. If you haven't noticed by now, throughout this video, I've been clamping pieces to my table saw and doing glue ups on my table saw, and that is because I unfortunately at this time don't have a dedicated workbench. I work in essentially a 20 by 20 workspace, and making my own hasn't really been a priority yet. I've been woodworking for about 2 years now, and I've gotten by all right without a workbench, but maybe in the near future. Anyway, back to this drawer build. Because I was trying to do so much extra for this piece, I didn't want the drawer face to be just a simple rectangle. Initially, I contemplated having a kind of trapezoidal drawer pull, but then I thought to myself, and the bases already have a kind of curvy circular design, so I decided I wanted more of a semicircle drawer pull. I marked out all the lines to get this perfectly symmetrical, and then created a little jig with a circle and a bearing riding bit. I'm using an Amana 3/16 inch diameter flush trim bit and taking multiple passes to route to about a 1/4 inch depth. The remainder of the cut is made by getting as close as possible but not on the line with a jigsaw. I then take it to the router table and clean up the remainder with a 1/2 inch flush trim bit. I trace the semicircle pole design onto the actual drawer face and then cut close to the line with a jigsaw. Using double-sided tape, I put the template on the drawer face and then flush trimmed that to give myself a perfectly good smooth surface. This drawer face is pretty nice as is, but I wanted to add a little bit something more. I wasn't really sure if this was going to work, but I had an idea to take this 1/16 inch brass bar and laminate that into that semicircle pole. Much like I did with the epoxy earlier in the project, to get a mechanical bond with this epoxy and brass bar, I scuffed up the bar with 120 grit and then applied quite a bit of epoxy to both the bar and the drawer pull area of the face. I used the offcut from the MDF template earlier, wrapped that in sheathing tape, and used that to apply a consistent clamping force over the extent of the semicircle drawer pull. The epoxy I used to bond the brass to the wood was a 5-minute epoxy, but I still gave it 24 hours to fully cure, and then removed the extra brass with some metal snippers. Because I was a lot more sloppy than I wanted to be with this, there was quite a bit of excess epoxy on the piece, so I used sandpaper and a card scraper to get off all that excess. I then used the override function to disengage the blade brake system on the saw stop. This allowed me to rip the brass flush on the top of the drawer face. Now that I've got the drawer case, drawer box, and drawer face complete, I can start the assembly. For most woodworkers, getting a drawer box and drawer face set is pretty routine. This was my first project ever doing so, therefore I'm showing every part of the process. For some reason, this part of the project was the most intimidating for me. I don't know if it was because I hadn't done it before, because it was so close to the finishing process, or I just wanted to push off finishing the project, but ultimately setting this drawer box to the slides and then setting that drawer face to the box is actually quite simple. This card trick that you may or may not have seen before is a really effective method to evenly space the reveal of the drawer face. Also, this blue tape and CA glue and activator allows me to adhere the drawer face to the box so that I can easily maintain that reveal when attaching the drawer face. To attach the face to the box, I pre-drill holes for the screws, use a countersink bit so that the screw heads will sit below the surface, and then screw from the inside of the box on each side. The drawer should open and close smoothly with an even reveal around all of the sides. If not, micro adjustments may need to be made. I'm going to spare you guys the boring task of watching me sand, but I used the 5mm stroke 6-inch Deros, sanding at 120, 180, 240, water popping, and then 180 to finish it off. To polish up the brass, I used 800, 1000, 2000, and then finished it off with 4000 grit. With sanding done, there's just a couple small steps until I'm able to put finish on this. To brand this piece, I'm recessing a faux brass plastic logo puck that I had made by Christy from Oak Hill Millworks over on Instagram. With the use of a Forstner bit, these are easily installed and provide a very clean look. The very last step before finish was to create a template for installation of this wire grommet. The template was made with a Forstner bit and 3/4 inch MDF. This is a 2.5-inch polished brass wire grommet made by Doug Mockett, who is the sponsor of this video. Doug Mockett is a California-based company that specializes in fine architectural hardware. They have a plethora of different accessories such as drawer pulls, table legs and casters, power grommets, and wire management solutions. They offer a number of different options for sizes and finishes for all of these items. Each of the items on the website come with a technical drawing that well outlines the object dimensions, and some of the items on the website, such as this wire grommet, come with installation instructions. It's recommended to use either a 2.5-inch hole saw or a 2.5-inch Forstner bit to install the grommet collar, but I was concerned that using a drill bit would lead to the bit wandering. Instead, using a template and bearing riding template bit, I was able to create the same 2.5-inch hole without any wander or inconsistency. Once the hole is drilled, the collar can be tapped into place and adjusted until the grommet is flush with the wood surface. I found that using a Phillips head screwdriver and tapping from the underside allowed me to make micro adjustments to best level out the grommet. Numerous times in my short 2 years woodworking, I've had conversations with other makers about finishing. I've told many of my friends in the woodworking community that I firmly believe finishing and sanding are probably the most important part of a project and can really make or break its overall quality. For this desk, I wanted to maintain the organic look and feel of the wood, but also ensure the piece is going to be durable and hold up to everyday use. Thus, I chose to finish it with Rubio Monocoat. I applied the Rubio with a plastic spreader and white Scotch-Brite pad. After about 15 minutes or so, I buffed all of the excess oil off with shop towels and waited 24 hours for the finish to cure. Once cured, I used a green Scotch-Brite pad that is equivalent to about 600 grit and scuffed the surface to apply a second coat of Rubio. Before the second coat, I cleaned the entire surface with a microfiber to remove any fine dust. The same application method for the first coat is used. With a second coat, you can see a noticeable sheen increase and protection increase. The very last step to finishing this piece is applying a ceramic top coat. This ceramic product is the one made by Black Forest Wood Company. I apply the top coat in a grid pattern with a small microfiber and foam block. My personal preference is to apply 2 coats of the base coat ceramic product and then 1 coat of the top coat. This ceramic finish even further enhances the overall sheen and protection of the wood surface. As nervous as I was to create this video, I'm very glad I did. I learned a lot throughout and I'm excited to continue growing and learning on this woodworking and YouTube journey. If you enjoyed this video and want to follow along to see more of the cool stuff I'm going to make in the future, don't forget to subscribe. Also, leave me a comment below letting me know how you feel about the desk and some of the glamour elements I included, such as the book match panels, curly maple drawer box, and the brass accents. This desk took me 6 months to complete and the video another 3, putting the overall time spent on this project at 9 months. As far as the number of hours spent on it, I lost count. Now my question for you is this desk worth $2,500? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next build.